think of, when I was a kid growing up, me and a couple of buddies, whenever we wanted to watch movies, we always geared ourselves toward Chuck Norris movies and Arnold Schwarzenegger and Sylvester Stallone, and I don't know if it was wholesome all the time for us. We did learn that guys who were between the height of 5'9" to 5'11" could do a lot of damage to somebody if the camera shot the right angles. You get indoctrinated into the thought process that when a person's a man, when a man's a man, a real man, that he is one who can just physically take over a situation. And what we want to talk about in this tonight, and I confess as I put those two words up there, what we're looking at tonight is we're going to look at failures in manly qualities first. We're going to look at some Bible examples of people who had what we would consider, what the world would consider manly qualities, and we're going to see some failure in them. We're going to see some great failure in them. Then we're going to look at men who had some success serving God, and I think what we'll see is we'll see a different mindset about them, different qualities accented in their lives. And within that, I think there's a lesson for us to learn, and a lesson to pass on to the next generation. And I hope it's useful for you as you talk to, whether it be your grandkids or down the line. I hope it's useful for you. I know as I think about these are things that I think are useful for the servant of God going forward, things that we need to have in our tool belt, as it were. We think of physical strength, as I mentioned in the introduction. You think about, the movies we used to watch when we were kids, Chuck Norris and all those guys. You talk about guys who were physically strong. I mean, they were, real, I hate to say animals, but they were guys who could get after it. Is there anybody like that we read about in the Bible? There actually is somebody we read about in the Bible like that, Samson. Samson was what you would call strong as, I would say strong as an ox. That'd be the description we use today. He was strong beyond reason. I mean, he had abilities didn't even make sense. I mean, he took a jawbone of a donkey and tore people up with it. Wasn't the first time that happened to people, but the Philistines had a terrible time with him. Many times they were defeated by him. So much so that they finally decided, we got to figure out a way to beat this guy. We have got to figure out a way to defeat him. And in Judges 16, what we see in Judges 16 is Samson's downfall. And one thing about Samson's strength is it led him to have an arrogant mindset. It led him to think there was nobody who could beat him. He was arrogant with other people around him. He was arrogant with the woman he was with at the time. Delilah, in this particular point in time. Now, with this, she tries to figure out the source of his strength. Well, we're not going to take time to go through all the ins and outs of that. We understand the story. We've read it many times. We understand that eventually she gets it out of him. And at that point in time, if you were watching this in a movie, you'd want to look at him and say, no, don't do that. But he reveals what the source of his strength is. And she messes around and she shaves his head. And she's got him bound. And he thinks he's just going to get up and he's going to handle all these guys one more time. And we understand what happened. He couldn't handle them. They take him off into captivity. They gouge his eyes out. What did his physical strength gain him? What did it gain him? As we look at Judges 16, we see that it gained him time in prison in a Philistine jail. He spent his time grinding wheat. The last days of his life he spent grinding wheat. Finally, one time they bring him out. Now, it gets him killed because he's in a place where he tries to do one last great thing, and he dies in the process of taking all these other lives with him. But he wouldn't have been in that position if he hadn't been so arrogant as a result of his belief in himself, his belief in his own physical strength. But as we think about others, you think about good looks and great wealth. What the world thinks of as great qualities for men: physical strength, good looks, great wealth. Think about somebody who had good looks and great wealth. Who do you come up with? A character you come up with is Absalom. Turn, if you would, with me to 2 Samuel chapter 14. 2 Samuel chapter 14, verse 25. Read with me verse 25. Now in all Israel was no one as handsome as Absalom, so highly praised. From the sole of his foot to the crown of his head, there was no defect in him. Absalom was, by all accounts, a good-looking man. Absalom had great wealth with him as well, but what did they get him? Let's turn to 2 Samuel 18. Let's read verses. Let's go 9 through about verse 14. 9 through 14 of 2 Samuel 18. Now Absalom happened to meet the servants of David, for Absalom was riding on his mule, and the mule went under the thick branches of a great oak. And his head caught fast in the oak, so he was left hanging between heaven and earth, while the mule that was under him kept going. When a certain man saw it, he told Joab and said, Behold, I saw Absalom hanging in an oak. Then Joab said to the man who had told him, Now behold, you saw him. Why then did you not strike him there to the ground? And I would have given you 10 pieces of silver and a belt. The man said to Joab, Even if I should receive 1,000 pieces of silver in my hand, I would not put out my hand against the king's son. For in our hearing the king charged you and Abishai and Ittai, saying, Protect for me the young man Absalom. Otherwise, if I had dealt treacherously against his life, and there is nothing hidden from the king, then you yourself would have stood aloof. Then Joab said, I will not waste time here with you. So he took 3 spears in his hand and thrust them through the heart of Absalom while he was yet alive in the midst of the oak. Absalom found a way to alienate some people. Absalom did something he shouldn't have done in the first place. It wasn't his place to have the throne at that particular point in time, but you think about a good-looking man who had great wealth, and what did he get, Absalom? Well, they got Joab to put 3 spears in him while he was hanging in an oak tree. As we think about position, this world that we live in, this society we live in, values physical strength, to value good looks and great wealth, to value powerful position. I submit to you there probably is not one who had, at his point in time, a greater position than King Saul. He's the first king of Israel. He's the first one. Now, David, we know, is recognized as a greater king. Solomon, a more wise king. But Saul is the first one. And as we think about Saul being king of Israel, let's think about these passages of 1 Samuel. What did Saul do with his position? 1 Samuel chapter 10, verses 22 through 23. 1 Samuel chapter 10, verses 22 through 23. Therefore they inquired further of the Lord, Has the man come here yet? So the Lord said, Behold, he is hiding himself by the baggage. So they ran and took him from there, and when he stood among the people, he was taller than any of the people from his shoulders upward. He's an impressive looking man. He's in a powerful position. What does it do for Saul? What does it do for him? What does he do with it? What does he do with the position? Let's look at 1 Samuel 15, verses 17 and 22. Read through 22. Let's read through 22. Get the whole account, even though we know it well. Samuel said, Is it not true, though you were little in your own eyes? Referencing back to that account in chapter 10, when he was hiding among the baggage. You were made the head of the tribes of Israel, and the Lord anointed you king over Israel. And the Lord sent you on a mission and said, Go and utterly destroy the sinners, the Amalekites, and fight against them until they are exterminated. Why then did you not obey the voice of the Lord, but rushed upon the spoil and did what was evil in the sight of the Lord? Then Saul said to Samuel, I did obey the voice of the Lord, Lord, and went on the mission on which the Lord sent me, and have brought back Agag, the king of Amalek, and have utterly destroyed the Amalekites. But the people took some of the spoil, sheep and oxen, the choicest of the things devoted to destruction, to sacrifice to the Lord your God at Gilgal. And Samuel said, has the Lord as much delight in burnt offerings and sacrifices as in obeying the voice of the Lord? Behold, to obey is better than sacrifice, and to heed than the fat of rams. For rebellion is as the sin of divination, and insubordination is as iniquity and idolatry. Because you have rejected the word of the Lord, he has also rejected you from being king. King Saul was in a powerful position. What did he do with it? What did he do? He failed. The one thing that all three of these men have in common is they ultimately failed because they leaned on things that were not eternal. They were not things to, when we think about who we lean on the Lord. Servants of God lean on God. In difficult times, we lean on God in easy times because we are ever dependent upon him. These men failed to realize that. They failed to. Samson was appointed a judge by God to deliver his people. Saul was picked to be, he was the one chosen to be king. We think about these things, and in these qualities that we have, that the world values, physical strength, good looks and great wealth, powerful position, and what happens to every one of these guys when they have that? They fail because what is the failure? The failure is a failure to lean on God. It is a failure to be God first, God-oriented. I want you to turn with me, if you would, to Proverbs 16. Proverbs chapter 16. I want to look at verse 18. Proverbs chapter 16, verse 18. Pride goes before destruction, and a haughty spirit before stumbling. And that says a lot about all three of these men. But as we think about this, we think about failures, there's also successes, though. But these successes don't come with physical strength, good looks, and great wealth, and powerful position. They come with different qualities. I want us to think about these qualities that we see that lead to success. First, a spiritual mindset. Turn, if you would, in your Bibles to Daniel chapter 1. Daniel chapter 1. As we have on the screen, I'm going to read verses 4, 5, 8, and 10. 4, 5, 8, and 10. Youths in whom was no defect, who were good-looking, showing intelligence in every branch of wisdom, endowed with understanding and discerning knowledge, and who had ability for serving in the king's court. And he ordered him to teach them the literature and language of the Chaldeans. The king appointed for them a daily ration from the king's choice food, and from the wine which he drank, and appointed that they should be educated 3 years, at the end of which they were to enter the king's personal service. I'm going to read verse 6 as well. Now among them from the sons of Judah were Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. Skipping down to verse 8. But Daniel made up his mind that he would not defile himself with the king's choice food or with the wine which he drank. So he sought permission from the commander of the officials that he might not defile himself. Let's read verses 9 and 10 as well. Now God granted Daniel favor and compassion in the sight of the commander of the officials. And the commander of the officials said to Daniel, I am afraid of my lord the king, who has appointed your food and your drink. For why should he see your faces looking more haggard than the youth who are your own age? Then you would make me forfeit my head to the king. Let's continue on. But Daniel said to the overseer, whom the commander of the officials had appointed over Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, please test your servants for 10 days, and let us be given some vegetables to eat and water to drink. Then let our appearance be observed in your presence, and the appearance of the youths who are eating the king's choice food, and deal with your servants according to what you see. As we think about Daniel, we think about a young man who is given to focusing on God, given to serving God first. Even in this difficult place, think about it. They've been taken away not only from their home, now at this point in time, they're really taken away from their families. We don't ever read about Daniel's father and mother, about Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego's fathers and mothers. We don't read about them. We read about them as they seem to be separated from that. They're brought away. The king wants to teach them so that they can be in his service. And as we think about this, Daniel is focused on spiritual things, as his friends are. And instead of defiling himself, even at a young age, he looks the commander in the eye and says, I don't want to do this. I'm not interested in this. And proposes something for him. He proposes this challenge with the vegetables and water versus the other food. You think about that, Daniel being focused on things above. What did it do? Verse 9, God granted Daniel favor and compassion in the sight of the commander of the officials. And we know, as we read further, they looked much better than the other kids. Well, let's read further in Daniel. Let's look at Daniel chapter 6, verse 3. Daniel chapter 6. Take a look at verse 3. Then this Daniel began distinguishing himself among the commissioners and satraps because he possessed an extraordinary spirit, and the king planned to appoint him over the entire kingdom. It is with that in mind, that the next big thing is contrived against Daniel. But I want us to look at that verse. Then this Daniel began distinguishing himself among the commissioners and satraps because he possessed an extraordinary spirit. His mind was still focused on God. He had excelled, but he had not forgotten his God. He had not forgotten to serve God first. He stayed focused on God, and he excelled. He succeeded. He was elevated in the eyes of man because of his success and his focus on the Lord. We think about moral virtue. We mentioned this morning in our lesson that we have seen in our, just a side point in our lesson this morning, we've seen in our society a giving over to moral uncleanness. You think about Joseph when he was sold into slavery. He went to a place in Egypt where it was as unclean as it got. For that day, if you think about Genesis 39:9, and again, what's impressive about these young men, Daniel and Joseph? What is impressive about them? In difficult places when their family's not around, they are focused wholly on the Lord. They are focused square on God and pleasing Him first and foremost. Genesis 39, verse 9. There is no one greater in this house than I, and he has withheld nothing from me except you, because you were his wife. How then could I do this great evil and sin against God? Look at how he answers her. He doesn't just say no, but he tells her why. What would it be? It would be a sin against God. It would be great evil. And he will not have any part and parcel with that. He is not given to that thought process. He is not wanting to sin against God. As we think about forward looking, men with a spiritual mindset, men of moral virtue, forward looking. You think about Moses. Read with me these two passages, Acts chapter 7, verse 22. Acts chapter 7, verse 22, and then we'll look at the passage in Hebrews 11. Acts chapter 7, verse 22. Moses Moses was educated in all the learning of the Egyptians, and he was a man of power in words and deeds. Okay, so we know what Moses was. He, as a young man, he had been well educated. He had been well educated. Now we look at Hebrews 11. Hebrews 11, verses 24 and 25. By faith Moses, when he had grown up, refused to be called the son of Pharaoh's daughter, choosing rather to endure ill treatment with the people of God than to enjoy the passing pleasures of sin. Verse 26, considering the reproach of Christ greater riches than the treasures of Egypt, for he was looking to the reward. Think about that. Moses was a forward-looking man. He wasn't consumed in the moment. He was looking forward to something better, something greater than what he had. And he had a lot as the son of Pharaoh's daughter, the adopted son of Pharaoh's daughter. He had a lot already. But he put those things aside to do something greater. You look continuing on in chapter 11. By faith he left Egypt, not fearing the wrath of the king, for he endured as seeing him who is unseen. Consider all the other things. 28 and 29. By faith he kept the Passover and the sprinkling of the blood, so that he who destroyed the firstborn would not touch them. By faith they passed through the Red Sea as though they were passing through dry land, and the Egyptians, when they attempted it, were drowned. You look at Moses' choices as he grew up, and you see one who did not want to be part of the Egyptian hierarchy. He recognized where he was supposed to be. He wanted to be with God. And you look at Moses in his leadership, and I recognize that as we get to the point where he's ready to lead them in the land of Canaan, he has a shortcoming that costs him the opportunity to lead the people into the promised land. And that was a failing on his part. But Moses was always looking forward to that reward, looking to that land. He kept leading that people to that land, even though they were a contrary bunch. They were fussy, they were nitpicky. They were not an easy people to lead. And Moses led them anyway, because he knew what he was taking them to was something better than what they had. He believed it was. It was. It's a land that flowed with milk and honey. Moses was a forward-looking man. And as we think about these things, as we bring this lesson to a conclusion here, I want us to think about these things again. We think about these qualities. The world values physical strength. It values wealth. It values the appearance of someone. It values power, position, things like that. We see men who have those things, but when they have them without God, they fail. When I say that, when these men who failed, these failures we looked at earlier, they were men who failed because they quit focusing on God. They began to focus on self and other things, pleasing other people, not trying to please God. That's what their focus went. And that led to failure. But the men who succeeded kept their mind always focused on pleasing God first. And whatever else came of it is what came of it. As we think about that, I want us to think about this. A Chinese proverb, you can take this and $1 and get a drink at McDonald's, I guess. A Chinese proverb says, one generation plants the trees and another gets the shade. It's a fancy way of saying that the lives we live are witnessed by others. And many times in our lives, and I can say this in my own life, I've experienced more comfort earlier in my life than my father did. That's not because of anything I've done. It's because I've been blessed. And I think you look at that generation to generation, that's what we try to do, is we try to set things up for the next generation to do better. We try to live good examples. That's what the point really is that we need to recognize that the lives we live are witnessed by our children, they're witnessed by our grandchildren, whenever those come around. But as we think about that, what do we want them to see? We want them to see faithful servants of God. I may have all the success in this world, but if I don't have spiritual success, it's not going to mean much. And it'll be fleeting. The physical success will be fleeting if I don't have spiritual success. It's going to be what's going to define success for me and what needs to define success for me, for us individually, is we need to try to succeed in God. And if we succeed in Him, succeed in serving Him, succeed in obeying Him, pleasing Him every day. And in our bulletin today, there's an article about worship. It breaks down the three most commonly used words for worship in the New Testament, three most commonly used Greek words. There's one that sticks out that's the most common by far. But the point of those words is that they bring forth an idea that we are to always be. We assemble today collectively to worship, but my life, as Paul wrote in Romans 12:1, is to be a living sacrifice. That means I am to always be giving something to God. My life is meant to be, I should always be prostrating myself before God. As we think about that, that's going to show a life like that, a life like Daniel led, like Joseph led, like Moses led. And we can go into the New Testament and look at the apostles. Let's look at how Peter led his life. Late in his life, he was still a faithful teacher, a preacher of the Word, and was one who was regarded as an elder. That means he had a good marriage still, and he had children who were faithful to the Lord. We think about the success Paul had teaching and preaching the Word of God. These men did not have success because they proudly stuck forward their own chest. No, they had success because they humbly glorified God each and every day that they lived. And they planted, and they watered, and trusted God to give the increase. What do we want the next generation to see? We want them to see faithful servants of God. Let us take to heart these examples we have examined, and let's keep them in our hearts going forward as we live day to day. As we get ready to sing our invitation song, if you take your songbooks out, turn to number 280. As we get ready to sing that song, as we look out among the crowd, all of us have named the name of Jesus in baptism, but that does not mean that this invitation is invalid to us. As the Lord extends an invitation, He extends it so that we can examine ourselves and see if we are still remaining faithful to Him, if we're continuing to live faithful lives in service to Him. If there's anything we can do, if there's something in your life that's amiss, that has driven a wedge between you and your God, please make your way to the front and let us help you with that as we stand and sing the song Steve selected.